1952, what were your thoughts on the world's first H-bomb in the United States being set off, as well as Russia, learning that Russia had atomic capabilities as well?
Well, I thought this would be the first time the human race would be able to extinguish itself. And I wasn't worried because I knew that the U.S. and Russia wouldn't attack each other.
At the time, what were your thoughts on the world's first H-bomb being set off in 1952?
In 1952, I was a junior in high school. It was a topic of conversation, but more by the teachers than the students, because we were too busy having a good time.
That's a good answer.
We were sheltered.
Very sheltered.
Yeah. We read the newspapers, we read the news forecasts, reports, but I don't remember. I suppose it was ignorance. I was not. I didn't know enough to be afraid.
You also have to realize news was something that did not happen like today. Right. This happened, so boom.
15 minutes was your news coverage.
Or you went home and you turned your radio on. You listened to Gabriel Peter.
Yeah.
Remember him?
What did the 1953 ceasefire in Korea separating Communist North from Democratic South mean to you in the United States?
Well, I was glad the war was over. You know, people were getting killed, and it's a good thing. War is not good.
So, what did the 1953 ceasefire in Korea separating Communist North and Democratic South mean to you in the U.S.?
Take that one?
Well, again, I personally was overwhelmed when the class of '50 at West Point was wiped out. I had dated a West Point cadet, knew a number of people in that class, and that hit home when they were lost. But as far as North and South Korea, the political confrontation, it didn't affect me at all. It was just, yeah.
It affected me in the sense my brother was in the Navy during that period of time and sat on a destroyer tender. He was not in danger, but the 6 months of the year off the United States coast and 6 months of the year off the Japanese coast, not Korean. I was worried about him more than I was concerned about what's going on.
Well, I share that. My brother was a Navy jet pilot, and he was over in that part of the world too. And at that point, he was patrolling, but that was as close as I got to involvement in Korea.
Girls were affected in the sense that there were so few boys around. They were in the military. They wound up, when it was time to get married, marrying much younger men. My sister-in-law is 7 years older than my brother.
What was the reaction in the United States when news of Stalin's death was received?
Everybody was very happy. He was a terrible dictator, and they were glad he was gone.
What were your thoughts and feelings about McCarthy at the time, and is that still the same today?
It's still the same. I think McCarthy, it's been proven that he was wrong, and I thought that at that time too.
What did the invention of the polio vaccine mean to you?
It meant a great deal, because I remember when I was growing up, everyone was afraid of getting polio. There was a season when you got it, and in the apartment building I lived in, there were several other people that got polio, and some were paralyzed.
What did the invention of the polio vaccine mean to you?
Would be liberation.
Didn't have to worry about my daughter getting polio,
Yeah.
which my generation, I had 4 friends that got polio.
It was a scourge.
So what were your thoughts on the time of the Civil Rights Movement?
The Civil Rights Movement.
Martin Luther King.
Yeah. Thoughts on the time. I lived in Virginia at the time, and there had been segregation there earlier. I remember growing up as a kid, seeing water fountains for blacks and water fountains for whites and separate lunchrooms. I was there, I was conscious of the civil rights movement. I was not mature enough to really appreciate what was happening, but I was certainly aware. And of course now, in retrospect, it was magnificent what Martin Luther King did. And in fact, we have people here at Woodland Pond who participated in the march in Washington, and I think someone in Selma also. Was it? Who was?
That's Betsy Hates' husband.
Yeah.
And he's a clergyman, and I'm married to an Episcopal priest,
Yeah.
and he got involved. That was not the 50s, that was in the late 60s.
60s, yeah.
And with the street fights in Patterson, New Jersey, between the Puerto Ricans and the blacks. And he would go out in the streets in his clergy uniform with a hard hat on, because they were throwing bricks.
But it was so overdue, and Rosa Parks, and it was a terrible situation that existed in this country with the segregation. Now we look back on it with a completely different viewpoint, but in those days, that's what it was. That's the way it was, and I think you sort of become aware of these things and you say, yeah, that's the right thing to do after the fact. You know, you're too young to be a mover and shaker, at least in my work where I was, but certainly an interested observer.
So what were your opinions on Eisenhower, and how did they compare to Truman?
Well, I like both men, Eisenhower and Truman. I liked Eisenhower for his famous statement that we should watch out for the military-industrial complex. And I think that Truman was one of the best presidents we ever had.
What did you think of Eisenhower during his presidency? Do you think he handled the Cold War well?
Yeah, I thought he did a great job. Not only as a general, but I thought he did a great job as president. How about you? Did you have
Well,
any
the
complaints?
first, all I remember about that is coming home from college, and it was my first opportunity to vote. And that was a big deal to be able to vote.
Yeah.
At least in our generation. I don't know if the young people feel that way or not today. Back then, it was a big deal. And I voted for him.
What do you think about the space race during the decade? And do you remember specific launches such as Sputnik and Explorer 1?
Yes, I do. And the space race was very important because this was a Cold War between the U.S. and Russia. And being able to launch these rockets, etc., led to technologies that, you know, we use now. The missiles
Let it develop.
were developed. And I remember the United States, right after Sputnik was launched, they had a program. People from universities like MIT came up with textbooks to be used in colleges. They did this in less than a year, how to design rockets and all these things. And I think what helped us a lot was the veterans from World War II were able to get free college.
Yeah.
So we had a lot of college graduates in the U.S. at the time. We had a lot of engineers who could design what was needed in the space race.
What did the space race mean to you during the decade? Do you remember specific launches such as Sputnik and Explorer 1?
I sure remember Sputnik. Everybody remembers Sputnik. That was, boom, wake up, get busy. I wondered, if we had the technical resources to carry out Sputnik, and very quickly I learned that we did. I think we did a magnificent job quickly reacting to Sputnik. Yeah, good job.
What do you remember about the U.S. interference in Lebanon and just the containment policy in general in places like Cuba and reactions to Fidel Castro?
Well, I remember Cuba when the we spotted missile launching sites in Cuba, and the Russians were sending ships in which we thought had the missiles on them, and we blockaded Cuba, and we told them it would be war if, you know, if these ships proceeded, and the ships backed down because the Russians knew that we were stronger than they were.
What did the actions of Fidel Castro mean to you?
Well, again, that missile confrontation was the thing that brought it to my attention. I was not conscious of the Cubans emigrating to Florida. That was just not in my realm of consciousness. But when the JFK was down there in the White House worried about these missiles, whether this was going to, they were close enough to hit the United States, big time, and this could have been a very serious standoff between the Russians and the United States. So that was a lucky break.
Yes.
What did the kitchen debate between Nixon and Khrushchev mean to you, and what did it mean for Nixon's political career? Like, did it help or hinder him?
I don't think it helped or hindered him, but as far as I was concerned, he lost it because even though the Russians saw him, 5 days before, the Russian leaders met with another American. His name was David Rockefeller, so evidently the Russians knew who was the important person to speak to.
Yeah.
And it wasn't Nixon.
What do you remember about the 1950s that changed about everyday life?
I think more and more people were capable of affording TVs. Just that alone, being able to keep up with the world, the socialization became so important in people's lives.
And again, I want to say birth control. That was a big deal. It changed a lot of human behavior and a lot of cultural rules. I think that should be hailed as one of the major events of that time. You just don't know how hard it was without some form of birth control.
The 1950s were seen by many as a time of conformity. Did you notice this at all or think anything of it?
Well, I noticed what was going on. They were building all these houses, you know, in the suburbs. And I remember I went to the 1939 World's Fair, and General Motors had their own building, and you would sit in chairs and you would be moving around, and you would see suburban neighborhoods, you know, with highways. And in those days, all the towns were connected by trolley cars. You could take a trolley car to go from here to there. You didn't need a car. So General Motors and I believe also General Electric bought up all these trolley cars, and they shipped them to South America. And now Americans needed cars, and they lived in suburbs and needed cars to travel. And of course General Motors makes the cars, and General Electric makes the refrigerators that you need in these houses, etc., and all the other appliances.